Good afternoon. My name is Ben Zong, and I'm the Online Communications Manager for the California Fiscal Partnership. Thank you for joining us today for one of 4 virtual briefings we've organized ahead of tomorrow's Hydrogen Village at the Sacramento State Capitol. The Hydrogen Village is the largest showcase of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies ever at the State Capitol, and is an opportunity for us to educate policymakers in one of the world's largest economies and a leader in zero-emission mobility and environmental policies. The Hydrogen Village is a joint effort of the California Fiscal Partnership, California Hydrogen Coalition, California Hydrogen Business Council, the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association, and the Stationary Fuel Cell Collaborative. I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor of the briefings, GTI, or Gas Technology Institute, and its Hydrogen Technology Center. With me today are representatives from the hydrogen and fuel cell industry who will share with us the opportunities and the challenges of hydrogen mobility and energy. During the briefings, everyone is muted. However, there will be a Q&A session at the end, and so please use the questions feature to ask questions to the panelists. And with that, we have with us today Nico Bouwkamp from Gas Technology Institute, who will be moderating today's session on light-duty transportation. Nico?
Thank you very much, Ben, and I'm glad to be here with a panel of 5 experts that represent both the light-duty vehicle sector as well as the infrastructure sector. It's my pleasure to facilitate a discussion between all of the panelists, as well as hear what their perspectives are on light-duty fueling infrastructure, as well as light-duty fuel cell vehicles. So with that, let me allow the panelists to each introduce themselves briefly with their position within their company and a little bit about their company. And then I'll have a few slides to introduce the topic here and ground us a little bit and provide some context, and then we'll go to a panel discussion and also answer questions that the audience may have. So with that, let's start with Stani from Toyota. Stani, go ahead.
Thank you, Nico, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lestanya Stani Baker, Regional Director of Government Affairs for Toyota. I've been with the company for 30 years in a variety of roles, and right now I have the privilege of representing the company before government legislatures and elected officials with the really true opportunity to inform and influence public policy in support of Toyota's role as a mobility company. Toyota has been involved with hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles for 25 years, and we believe that for our customers, you need to have a full suite of vehicles, including hydrogen electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, and hybrid electric vehicles. I think all of those are necessary to meet all of our customer needs, and looking forward to having a discussion today, in particular about hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles and how they meet our customers' needs. Thank you, Nico.
Thank you, Stani. Good to have you. Let's move on to Marc.
Thanks, Nico, and welcome everybody. My name is Marc Deutsch. I work for American Honda. I am a department head for new business execution, as well as the manager for electric vehicles. I believe that Honda has kind of a similar approach to Toyota, where we feel we need to have a solution for all types of duty cycles, whether it's battery electric, hybrid electric, or fuel cell electric. Being here today, the focus is fuel cell electric, so I'm looking forward to discussing more with everybody. Thanks, Nico.
Welcome, Marc, and let's move to Gil.
Thanks, Nico. So I'm Gil Castillo. I work for Hyundai Motor America, where I'm the Senior Group Manager in charge of vehicle strategy as well as regulatory compliance. So increasingly, vehicle strategy encompasses electrified vehicle products, which include, as aforementioned, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, pure battery electrics, and of course, fuel cell vehicles. So not to sound like a broken record, but I think you find that all 3 manufacturers on this call are developing battery electric and plug-in hybrid solutions, but along with that, fuel cell vehicles. And for the simple reason being that we find that they are absolutely necessary to ensure that we can fully move away from the internal combustion engine towards an electrified future. And so I'm really happy and glad to be here and have an opportunity to discuss Hyundai and Hyundai's kind of offerings and what we're doing in the fuel cell light duty area. So thank you.
Welcome, Gil. Let's move on to Bill.
Thanks, Nico. Hi, everyone. This is Bill Zobel with Iwatani Corporation of America. Relatively new here with Iwatani. Been with the group now for about 6 months. Prior to that, I ran the California Hydrogen Business Council for a couple of years, but have been developing alternative fuel infrastructure for almost 20 years. So Iwatani is an integrated participant in the hydrogen value chain with supply, distribution, and retail opportunities for consumers. And we're excited to share some of our thoughts today. So look forward to the panel.
Welcome, Bill. Good to have you. And then we have Shane as well joining us. Shane?
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Shane Stevens, and I'm one of the founders of FirstElement Fuel. I serve as the company's Chief Development Officer, and I also sit on the board of the company. FirstElement was started almost 9 years ago in 2013 with the goal to develop a network of hydrogen stations so that car makers could market the cars. And we've been developing our True Zero brand of stations throughout California, and today we're proudly the largest provider in the world of hydrogen into the mobility sector. So it's been a long journey and a lot of successes along the way. I think we, at this point, are seeing that our stations, each time they're open up, are very heavily used. There's a lot of demand out there from customers, a lot of excitement about driving fuel cell cars, and we're just going to keep doing our best to try to keep up with all the great work that the automakers are doing in the car development, and try to build more stations and keep them online as best we can to serve the customers. Thank you, Shane. Good to have you. And let me move then now to a few overview slides. Some of this has been presented before. Yesterday there was a webinar that provided all the details on what the current status is of hydrogen stations in California, as well as fuel cell vehicles. I'm just bringing these up as a refresher and provide some context for this panel specifically. The graph you see here is an overview of the current hydrogen infrastructure, the retail, light-duty retail fueling infrastructure in California. It shows current open stations as well as what's currently unavailable, because there's a number of stations that is challenged with either operations or for other reasons that cannot provide fuel in a consistent manner. So those are being worked on, but there are also a number of stations under development and a number of stations proposed. However, this is just a current snapshot of what's going on. There's a lot more that is coming and is expected. So next, Ben. The next goal would be 200 stations. That's been talked about, and the work being done currently to secure funding also focus on this goal. And after that, as the California Fuel Cell Partnership, we've talked about a fuel cell revolution. And in that document also we give an envisioned target for 2030. Next. So as you can see, this is there's quite a lot of work to still be done, but currently many lessons are learned. Vehicles are rolling out, lessons are learned on the vehicle side as well as on the infrastructure side, and we hope to hear from that in more detail during the upcoming session. So let's see, next. So a quick overview of the current hydrogen stations and network health. There are a number of stations that were just opened, 4 or 5 in the last several weeks, months, and there are several also in commissioning, and notably of several of the folks here on this panel. Some stations I mentioned they were unavailable at the moment. There's a number of reasons for why, but you get a sense of where these stations stand, and some of them will become available in the nearer term, so add to the network that's currently in the works. Some of the station improvements that are ongoing, of challenges that have been very visible and experiential, so to say, for the fuel cell vehicle drivers. The hydrogen supply challenges that are mostly resolved at the moment, and there is good potential moving forward with regards to increased and reliable supply, and also that results in deliveries that have improved. And then also there were some challenges with filling some of the vehicles, and that's been improved as well. And both Iwatani and FirstElement are here on the call as well, and they may say a little bit more about that, and including the durability of these stations.
Next. So by the numbers, as you can see, this is an overview of light-duty fuel cell vehicles, as well as transit buses and also trucks. The truck numbers are not mentioned in here yet, but the station numbers are. So as you can see, over 12,000 vehicles are sold and leased in the US, and there's an asterisk there, but that comes from our website. But I read the asterisk as those are all in California, not as in the US, because there is really the fueling infrastructure is here. So I'd like to be a little selfish and say this is really California equals US at this moment. There are a large number of fuel cell buses in operation as well. More, you've heard more about that during one of the previous panels today, and so please go to that recording when it's available and listen to the details on that. AC Transit talked about that, and here you can see how those numbers that I showed earlier on the graph, how that is how the cumulative total of that comes together, and then also a number of truck stations also mentioned in the previous panel. So with that, let us move now to allow some of the panelists to make some comments. And we'll first move to Stani, who represents Toyota. You just heard her introduction. So Stani, go ahead.
Thank you, Nico. I think, we've probably hit on some of the highlights for hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. And you just showed us the numbers, right? And, those were March numbers. I think the April 1st numbers are 13,000 hydrogen fuel cell electric light duty vehicles on the road. And for us, we have probably the majority of those vehicles today. We have 174 dealers selling Toyota vehicles in the state of California, and only 10 of those dealers are allowed to sell hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles based on their proximity to fueling infrastructure. So, just sort of imagine the possibility when we have sufficient fueling infrastructure and sufficient fuel, if we were able to allow all of our dealers to offer this technology to our customers, what a difference that might make in the market. And, we recognize, and I've been listening to the panels earlier today. I think, everyone realizes that on the light duty sector, customers who either live in multi-unit dwellings where they don't have the ability to plug at home, where they have homes where maybe they either can't afford or are unable to retrofit for charging at home. And frankly, in some communities where, you want to have an attendant where you're fueling your vehicle. All of those, including customers who have extended commutes to work and to school, all of those customers will probably be best benefited by hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. And so, as we said, we offer technologies in all of the spaces, but talking about hydrogen fuel cell, they do have a particular, we think, customer base that would benefit from the technology, and having the fueling infrastructure available would help us be able to provide that technology to our customers. I just can't imagine today when we think about gas prices, right, what hydrogen fuel cell vehicle might look like to our customers, because Toyota and the other OEMs on this call today, on this panel today, in addition to offering incentives on the vehicles, we offer fuel for hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. So our customers get fuel cards when they take the cars for complimentary fuel for 3 years, $15,000. And just imagine what a competitive advantage it would be if we could sell those cars broadly in the state right now, with gas prices being what they are. I think, I've had certainly anecdotally a number of friends and family expressing interest in the technology. So, just beyond meeting the needs of customers, the scalability, we heard from the heavy duty panel this morning, heard my colleague James Cass and others talk about heavy duty. We obviously are working in that space, but this conversation is about the light duty space. And one of the things that we know in terms of the synergy between light duty and heavy duty is that the investment we're making on the light duty side in terms of improving the performance, the reliability, and the technology on the core side will help drive the cost down for the core technology on the heavy duty side, and then likewise on the heavy duty side, the use and pull of the fuel will help bring down fuel costs for customers in the long term on the fuel side. So, you know, in our world, fuel cell vehicles have a really good future, a really good opportunity to serve specific customers who have the need for the technology, and the scalability of the technology is just really great. And so having fuel cell electric vehicles available, we think is just really smart all the way around. And definitely, you know, when we talk about being a mobility company and wanting to meet the needs of our customers, we definitely need the technology. And I think not only Toyota, we've got the Air Resources Board in other states recognizing that to fully electrify the fleet, you're going to have a mix of all of the technologies. And we've got, you know, fortunately champions in other states, including Washington and Oregon, who are starting to help bring on hydrogen fuel cell electric fueling infrastructure, and then of course in the Northeast. So when you look at the Pacific Northwest and the Pacific Northeast, we're starting to see the infrastructure come on board and just looking to help spread that. So I think those are sort of my core talking points. There are certainly customers who would benefit from the technology. Having the light duty and the heavy duty is important, and frankly having sufficient fueling infrastructure and fuel is key to supporting all of that. So I think that those are my key talking points. Thank you, Nico.
Hey, Stani, before you go and turn off your video cam for the next speaker, a quick question that came through. This is probably an interesting question to address now and not wait until the panel. But the question is, how many Toyota fuel cell vehicles are projected to be manufactured for next year? And I think you touched maybe on a little bit of context already, but maybe if you're willing to share anything about that, please do so.
So the last production numbers we announced was frankly a 10-fold increase. So our first generation, we announced 3,000 hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. With the current model on the market, we announced that we were going to produce 30,000 of those. And so that's frankly the last number that we have publicly available. But if you look at how many vehicles you showed us, Nico, that are on the road versus, you know, what our production is coming up, there's some room to continue selling vehicles this year for sure.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know, and that also helps us to keep things focused with regards to questions, because this was very specific for you. Okay, thank you, Stani. So with that, let's move on to Marc, who's going to share some points and perspectives, the perspective of Honda. So Marc, take it away.
Well, thank you, Nico. First of all, you know, Stani hit a lot of points that resonate with Honda and probably with Hyundai as well. So I'll try not to be repetitive on that. One of the key points is in terms of opportunity, as probably Toyota and Hyundai, we have a small number of, or a small subset of our dealers in California that are fuel cell dealers. But beyond that, you know, Honda believes that fuel cell vehicles, you know, they represent the ultimate solution for powering future mobility. We view this as a marathon, not as a sprint, as we recognize that our customers need to grow with us as we develop these advanced powertrains. You know, hydrogen fuel is sourced domestically and produced from a broad variety of resources. As a low carbon fuel for energy and security, that's one of the reasons why we feel it can be the ultimate solution to zero emission mobility. One of the things is, you know, we've adjusted our volume. We're not as high a volume as Toyota. We started out of the gate at a pretty high volume. We've reduced that volume, and we're trying to kind of deploy the vehicles at a rate that's more proportional to the hydrogen infrastructure development. And we've had some hiccups over the past few years, and you know, we try not to flood the market, but we're also anxious to put vehicles in the marketplace as well. One of the things that's going to be really important moving forward is, you know, collaboration with local governments, with the installers and hydrogen station owners such as Iwatani and FirstElement. And the idea is not to have, you know, a bunch of cars on the road and catch up with the infrastructure, or have a lot of infrastructure and trying to catch up with vehicles. It's trying to balance the flow of both is one of the things that we're trying to work on. The other, you know, big opportunity is our current administration is moving forward towards electrification. We are focusing on multiple solutions. There are opportunities in markets where hydrogen today is a bit of a challenge, but we're working with different groups, different parts of the country to see how we can expand those markets and not just be a BEV market. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and I'm going to just leave it at, we're going to continue to work our way through. Our focus is to continue to reduce CO2 emissions, not just in our vehicles, but also in our plants and facilities, dealerships. And we're looking at hydrogen fuel as being a source for more than just cars. So I'm going to give it back to you, Nico, and see if there's any questions, or I'll be open for questions later.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. That's good to have to share the perspective as well, and also the broader perspective outside of transportation. I just looked, Marc, before you hand it off to the next one. There was one question specifically for you, and I think this may be based on some of the news that has been out there about Honda's fuel cell vehicles, and I was wondering if you could maybe say a few words about that and maybe repeat what Honda actually said about that specifically.
Yeah, okay. So I'm assuming that you're referring to the fact that the Clarity production has stopped. So I'm going to give everybody an update. So American Honda had planned a stoppage of the Clarity fuel cell in 2020. And at that time, we were supposed to move forward with the joint venture that we have together with General Motors on fuel cell development. That has taken a little bit longer, plus the challenges in the infrastructure has delayed a few things. We did extend production an extra year. We are working on next generation vehicle. It will be out in the near future. There'll be more information available later this calendar year on details of that. Unfortunately, I can't really discuss future products, but I do want to make sure everybody understands that Honda is not out of the hydrogen game. We are still focused on developing vehicles. We are currently in our joint venture with General Motors purchasing equipment and doing testing on fuel cell systems. And we will have another vehicle out. Details will follow when they're available.
And thank you, Marc. And there's another question that's actually focusing on the stationary side of things, and thank you for answering that question as much as you could. The previous one about, I think it was mostly about the Clarity, because it was talking about mixed information about fuel cell vehicles. But you mentioned the stationary fuel cells, and the question is, does Honda have plans to sell their fuel cells for stationary power?
We have a variety of different items in testing and engineering. We'll have to see what the future holds on what may or may not be available for consumer consumption. I can't talk about those things right now in any more detail.
That's all right. You probably already told us a lot more than what folks can read in the general press releases. Thank you. So with that, let's move on to our next speaker. It was Gil Castillo with Hyundai. So Gil, take it away.
Thanks, Nico. So I'm not sure what I can add in Toyota. Stani mentioned just about everything. I think that's very important for us all. And the same with Honda. So I think recently in the news and with Hyundai sales, I'm sure everyone's aware that we've been selling, recently launched the Ioniq 5 and soon launching the Ioniq 6 and the Ioniq 7 battery electrics. And Genesis also is going to have a GB60, electrified GB70 and G80. And so there's a great focus right now on a lot of our electrified battery side. And we do expect those vehicles to make up the majority of our electrified sales. But despite that, we are still very much in the camp that we need fuel cell vehicles in order to reach our ultimate target. Now, the government, the state may have this ultimate goal of being 100% EV 2035 or later, depends on state or federal, but Hyundai itself also has internal goals. And one of those goals is also to quickly move to a purely electric future. But we recognize that the only way that's possible is that if we reach out to all consumers, not just consumers who can benefit from battery electric or, because they can have a place to charge or either home or work. We need to reach those consumers in areas where, or consumers who can't plug in, consumers who live in areas where plugging in doesn't make sense, et cetera, et cetera. And we also have to consider the fact that these vehicles have a life, and that life extends into the used car market. And if you look at the data, used car buyers, they are less likely to have a place to charge and less likely to be able to benefit from a battery electric vehicle. And so because of all those reasons, fuel cell still plays and will continue to play a very important role in our lineup, current and future. To that end, we're developing heavy duty and light duty solutions. In the morning session, I think Jerome Gregoire was on there talking about Xcient and our heavy duty solution, which actually uses 2 Nexo fuel cell stacks from our light duty solution. Hyundai, aside from that, is also investigating application of our fuel cell technology in urban air mobility, in freight, in marine transportation, et cetera, because fuel cell makes a lot of sense in areas where it's very difficult to move completely away from fossil fuels, relying solely on battery. So I think with that, and we have to acknowledge the fact that this will come up during our conversation, that fuel cell is a step behind battery electric in terms of consumer adoption, consumer consideration, and such. But I think that's just an indicator of the fact that the battery technology has progressed at a quicker clip, and but it doesn't mean that fuel cell has become irrelevant. All it means is that we have to acknowledge that there's a wide need for a range of solutions, and that in order to be where we want to be in terms of fully electrified future, which even the state of California has acknowledged requires fuel cell technology. So I'm really happy to be here, and looking forward to some of the questions that everyone's going to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Maybe a quick question for you on perspectives. You mentioned that Hyundai sells both plug-in vehicles as well as fuel cell electric vehicles, and that fuel cell electric vehicles, the numbers may be a little lower than on the battery electric side of things. What are your thoughts on the need for infrastructure to make sure that you are able to sell more vehicles in the future?
Yeah, so clearly the number of vehicles that we sell or anyone else sells is tied directly to infrastructure. And it's kind of the polar opposite with battery electric. And I like to think of it as a pay now versus pay later. So with battery electric technology, you can start sales relying initially at least with people who have a place to charge at home, and sell a good number of those vehicles relying on those consumers. It's only when you try to reach mass market, right, that you realize that you need to have significant public infrastructure to achieve the numbers that you're looking for with battery electric. And so it's a pay later model, right, where once you reach a certain number, to reach a certain penetration rather, you need to have significant public infrastructure for battery charging. Fuel cell is very different. Fuel cell is more of a pay now, where we need the infrastructure in order to start and seed the sales. But what's very interesting is once you have a certain amount of fueling infrastructure, just because of the nature of the stations that can support a large number of vehicles, you realize that you don't need as many stations in the future to support even larger and larger vehicles. But we're not there yet. Right now, the number of stations that are available significantly limits the number of vehicles that we can sell. Of course, we have to ensure that our customers are happy, they have a positive fueling experience, and right now we certainly can need or can use a lot more stations so that we can continue growing the number of vehicles that we have. And that's not just in California, obviously. In order for fuel cell to be a solution for everyone, it needs to be available everywhere. And so that means infrastructure on the East Coast, the Upper West Coast, and then hopefully eventually, the Central America, well, the Plain States, the Midwest and such. But yes, right now the number of stations is growing, but we can certainly have or use a lot more stations sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you for adding that perspective. With that, now we've heard perspectives from the car OEMs who, as well as Gil just mentioned, and Stani also referenced to build heavy-duty trucks. We're moving on to the infrastructure side of things, and first we have Bill to share a perspective on their perspective on fueling infrastructure and what the needs are there and what maybe needs to change for that to be economically self-sufficient and so on. So Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Nico. Again, great to hear from all of our OEM partners, and we certainly wouldn't be here without the three companies that have stepped up to provide these vehicles for the marketplace. So thank you very much for that. One of the projects that we're pretty excited about, we're working very closely with Toyota on a project we call Futurity, which is the development of 7 stations down in Southern California. First one of those came online back here in March of this year, and we'll have one coming online about every 6 weeks through the remainder of this year. So we're excited to have those stations all coming online. And for those that watch the hydrogen news, you saw our recent announcement with Chevron Corporation, where we'll be working with Chevron to put another 30 stations into California as quickly as we can here. So we're really excited about that. And there are a lot of other development opportunities in the works as well, including our GFO award. So an awful lot going on there. I appreciated Marc's comment about hydrogen being the ultimate solution for mobility. We absolutely agree with that. Provides, a one-to-one transition or one-to-one comparison with today's current vehicles, range, speed of fueling, applicability. All of those things exist with these vehicles. So we think the consumers are going to see this. As an integrated player, we have a footprint on the supply side of the equation as well. We have a plant that's coming online in late 2023 called SGH2 in partnership with Shell up in Lancaster, California. That plant will take recycled waste material and put it through a self-contained gasification unit to produce very low CI, negative CI hydrogen product that will go into the market. And I think as we see more and more renewable hydrogen supply come into the market, you're going to see prices come down. So you're going to see the supply become much more available for stations as they come online, and just there'll be more availability for everybody in the marketplace, and the signals to the consumer will become better and better as we go forward. So we're pretty excited about that. One thing for certain, as the competition around hydrogen continues to increase and supply continues to increase, and the federal government steps in with their funding to help build out some of these new hubs that we'll probably talk about in a later panel this afternoon, the price is going to come down for sure. And there will be, conversely, a lot of strain, I think, on the states and nation's electricity grid. A lot of requirements for increasing the renewable content of that, and the price of electricity is going to go up. So you'll probably see some sort of a crossing of those two paths here in the very near future, and see hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles become much more competitive. So we're very excited about that. There's an awful lot that can be done on the policy side. I think there's a lot that can be done on the local municipal side to help with development, and we'll probably get into a bit more of that as we go forward into the panel. But I want to give Shane a chance to speak and then jump into the panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill, very much. One quick question before you hand off the baton to Shane. Maybe a perspective on the current cost of hydrogen stations today, and what are the projected costs of hydrogen on 2025 and 2030. You touched on that already a little bit, and maybe on the second question, the projected cost of hydrogen, that may be a little too specific, but maybe a little bit of a perspective on the current cost of hydrogen stations. And I'm not sure if the question is specifically targeted on like X dollars, or if it's maybe in perspective on what it costs compared to other alternatives.
Yeah, no, fair question. I mean, any new technology is going to be expensive, right? It doesn't have scale, and the supply and value chain that support the development of infrastructure is being developed now. As that becomes more robust and competition and innovation take place in the market, you're going to see lower and lower costs over time. The CEC put out a report, I have to say about a year and a half ago or so, that showed clearly with a graphic how the size of the stations was increasing and the costs were coming down. And I think you'll continue to see that trend on the station side for a long, long time. And as Gil pointed out, these stations are able to service much larger numbers of vehicles. So the ability to attract large volumes of customers will become better and better. On the cost of hydrogen, it just simply has to come down to compete with petroleum fuels. And I think it will come down much more quickly than we expect.
Thank you, Bill. And it also probably depends on what the price of gasoline does in comparison as well. I had a friend recently post on Facebook and saying that up in Northern California, the far north, I think it's the Ukiah area, the cost of gasoline was in the $8.50 range per gallon. So if that were the case in LA, hydrogen would be in a different world with regards to what's affordable than we are typically envisioning. So thank you, Bill, much appreciated for answering that question. With that, let's go to the next panelist, Dr. Shane Stevens. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nico. And Nico, by any chance, you had a slide that showed our station in Fountain Valley. Could you get that back up there? Do you have the capability to do that?
Yeah, if we scroll back, if Ben doesn't mind scrolling back to the station, the health
Thanks.
network.
Sorry,
health
Ben,
one.
and I'll start talking while you do that. But I think one of the most critical things about hydrogen is its ability to scale. And I think we're making great progress on that, right? So when we first started building hydrogen stations in the state of California, they had the ability to fill one car at a time, right? We call that one fueling position, and we quickly saw that was not a sustainable model, because as cars got deployed, and customers are driving these cars, by the way, like their primary car. Our data shows that they are putting equivalent miles on their car as what a gasoline station driver does in California on average, which is great news. It's not a secondary car that sits in your garage. They're using it like their primary car. But what we saw is that we were getting very early on lines at stations were getting overwhelmed, and we started looking at developing stations that could do more cars at the same time. So this is the newest generation of station that we're doing. It has 4 fueling positions at the same time, right? So we've quickly leapt up from being able to do, around 50 or 60 cars a day to stations that can do actually 350 cars a day, right? And these stations started getting used heavily pretty much right after we opened them, right? So these stations are doing 200 cars a day, which is over 8,000 miles of driving, right, off of one station in one day. And when the stations are fully utilized at 350 cars, that'll be over 10,000 miles in a day. So if you look at the size of the station, that's still really small for a gas station, right? I mean, you don't see gasoline stations with 2 dispensers. So if you think about all the gas stations we have, all the fueling positions we have, it's a huge amount of fuel that we have to displace if we're actually going to replace every car in California with a zero emission vehicle. And hydrogen has an ability to scale that can do that. We're seeing it now with stations that can do 4 fueling positions, and we're looking at stations that can do a lot more fueling positions. We're looking at stations that can refuel heavy duty trucks on the order of 10 minutes or less. And we're also, through that scale, able to drive down the price of hydrogen at the pump. So at these larger stations that can do 4 fueling positions, we've already driven the price at the pump down by 25%. And again, we're just getting started. I mean, these are a small number of relatively small hydrogen stations that we're deploying in California. So do we think that we can get to larger stations at scale that compete with the price of gasoline? Absolutely we can. But I think Gil from Hyundai said something really profound earlier, which is that, with hydrogen, the difficulty is really at the beginning. We're kind of on the upward slope right now, trying to get over the initial hump. We're only on the 2nd generation of fuel cell vehicle that's been deployed. So we're pretty early in the market. And I can tell you that automakers have invested quite a bit more than people have on the hydrogen infrastructure side. Our little company, I'm happy to say, is finally getting enough momentum, enough traction. And thanks to the great policies at the state of California, we're securing enough private investment now that we're really starting to move the needle forward on getting over those supply chain humps and issues. We've recently opened up a distribution hub in Northern California to assure a more robust hydrogen supply. That was a $12 million private investment. We've also invested on top of that additional $8 million on hydrogen trailers to help assure that the distribution of the fuel to our stations was robust. We partnered with Air Liquide, who is building a hydrogen production facility of 30 tons of hydrogen per day, dedicated to the transportation fuel market. So we're getting over that initial hump. but it still comes with a lot of teething issues. We're learning a lot about equipment, which unfortunately there's not a lot of supply out there for equipment. It doesn't have a lot of testing before it goes into the field, so we work out a lot of bugs on customers. But another big investment that we've completed recently is to actually open up an innovation center, which allows us to test equipment before it goes into the field. And it allows us to make a lot of spare parts, manufacture components for improved durability and reliability. And we're seeing a lot of the benefits of that in the field today, with a greatly improved uptime at our stations, both in terms of reliability of parts and mechanical issues, and improved reliability of supply. So I think, if you look at the slide that Nico presented in terms of the rollout of hydrogen to 200 stations and 1,000 stations in 2030, those are great policy goals set out by the state of California that are achievable and will be achievable if that confidence is there, that the policy will be in place, that the goals are in place, and that companies can invest, and companies will invest at that point. Right now, there's, I think until recently, was a lot of hesitancy in terms of, well, can I really secure those investments to invest in the right supply chain materials, to invest in the right supply of hydrogen fuel and distribution of hydrogen fuel. And, what I can say from our little company is that we've recently seen private capital pouring into this sector because that confidence is there. So I think the 2025 policy goals set by California, by the state of California, are really helping. And I think that you will see a lot more private investment get unlocked and poured into the state, and a lot more achievements on hydrogen infrastructure, on hydrogen for light duty vehicles, on hydrogen for heavy duty vehicles, if we keep that commitment going. And you'll see benefits to the customer and to the rollout of zero emission vehicles in terms of the size of stations, the way they scale up, and the cost of hydrogen being driven down. I want to end on what is, perhaps the most important note of all, which is that at the end of the day, we're moving to hydrogen for the benefits of zero emission and eliminating carbon from our fuel supply chains. And I want to say proudly for our company that we are today at net zero carbon for all the hydrogen that we dispense into our vehicles. And that is certified by the state of California through the California Air Resources Board. So that's not some made up number, right? That's been certified through the state. And I think that if you look at other hydrogen companies, I think in general, we're at something like 85 or 90% of all the hydrogen sold into vehicles on the state is net zero carbon. So I think that's a really strong starting point. And, by working with the state of California and continuing the great policies of the state, I think hydrogen has an opportunity to, remain zero carbon or near zero carbon, and then get all the carbon out here in short order. So it's a great story in terms of looking at the goals that we're trying to achieve from the environmental side as well. So with that, I'll stop, and I also want to make sure that we leave sufficient time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Much appreciated. And one follow-up, a quick follow-up question on your comments about the Innovation Center. Bless you. Is the Innovation Center, is that also a lesson learned that FirstElement Fuel learned through the rollout of your network and working with suppliers, or those suppliers that were there?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, to coin a phrase, the buck stops here, right? I mean, we of course, yes, have had supplier challenges both on equipment and on distribution. But we're the ones that have to suffer through the pains of that with the customer, right? And we're the ones trying to provide that customer experience. So I think once we reach the point where there is enough confidence in private investment that we could raise the capital to go do these things, to open up the Innovation Center, to build a distribution hub, we went ahead and did that. We raced to do that as fast as we could. So it's a lesson learned. But I think it's also when you're experiencing, the demand for hydrogen that the customers have and experiencing the hiccups that they face and how that affects their day-to-day lives, right? They're trying to get to the airport, they're trying to pick up their kids from school or soccer practice or whatever it might be, right? You take that responsibility and you move heaven and earth to try to do something about it, right? And I think that's the position we've found ourselves in. And I'm just, again, because of the policies of the state of California and the private investment that's unlocked, I'm really happy that we've been able to aggressively, do something about these things. And I would say that I'm not going to sit here and claim that we're perfect, but I'd say that we're a good, 80% of where we'd like to get to, right? And that last, 20% is going to be hard, and the last 5% is going to be really hard, right? To get to the customer experience that we're aiming to achieve. But I think we're making great strides in that direction. So.
Well, thank you for sharing the perspective. And with that, I want to invite the other panelists to come back online and turn on their videos. And Ben, if you can forward, yeah, thank you. See all the panelists that are on, and there are a number of questions that came in. And let me ask you the first question. And this is for both of you. So as a representative of both light-duty vehicle OEMs as well as light-duty retail stations, why is continued investment in light-duty hydrogen refueling stations important? And maybe we'll start with Stani and then Stani, and then maybe see if someone else has additional comments on that as well and perspective.
Thank you, Nico. So as we've probably discussed already, I think, the investment on the light duty side from us as OEMs who are working both on light duty and heavy duty, right? The research and the investment we're doing there is going to improve the quality, the performance, and reduce the costs on the heavy duty side. And I think there is zero question but that hydrogen is the solution for heavy duty in terms of being able to take the capacity that you need and not add a lot of extra weight with batteries. And for us, that's probably the market answer. But there's also a customer answer. And for customers who live in rural areas, who have long commutes, as we've talked about, who are unable to charge at home, we definitely know that the state of California and certainly Toyota, we're interested in environmental justice communities. Those communities would really benefit from light duty hydrogen, and just to have the fueling infrastructure for those customers is key. If you look at charging, even the NRDC acknowledges that over 80% of battery electric vehicle customers charge at home. And so you really need to have the investment for the fueling infrastructure for customers who cannot fuel at home. You cannot fuel, today anyway, a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle at home. And so the investment on that light duty side is key to driving the technology that will support the heavy duty, but is also key to addressing needs in the communities where battery electric may not be the answer and the solution, and certainly for those customers who will not be able to enjoy the benefits of a battery electric vehicle, but absolutely 100% deserve, as I think Shane and Gil and others have noted, a zero emission experience, right? They deserve to have those vehicles in their home fleets. They deserve to have them in their communities. And that's frankly why the investment on the light duty side is important. And I stand to be expanded upon or corrected by my friends in the industry.
Bill, go ahead. Who is
no, I was just going to say, Stani covered pretty much everything. Just want to add a couple little points. And one is, Shane made the comment about the customer experience and the load on them. I think the load is also on us OEMs. And I think as we continue to develop the infrastructure, it just makes it, removes some of those barriers, some of the frustrations that the consumers have. And the other point is, I think that Stani touched upon is, that not everybody in high density housing has access to chargers where they live. So, to have that zero emission experience, fuel cell will provide that if there's adequate infrastructure.
Bill? I'd like to make a comment. Just from oh, I'm sorry. Is
no,
it okay if
go,
I jump
go
in?
ahead. Yeah? You're already going, so let's go.
A slightly different perspective, I think, is just that, you know, if we want to get customers into zero emission vehicles, we see customers that want to get into and drive their zero emission vehicles at our stations every day. And so far, we've never been disappointed in terms of we open up a station and it gets overwhelmed, you know, really fast. So, you know, back in 2017, we started planning for doing these stations that had 4 fueling positions. And people told us, well, you know, isn't that too much? Shouldn't you have 2 fueling positions and then maybe you can add 2 later? And we said, you know, no, we think that we want to be prepared right now. And by the time they open, we think that demand will come. And the moment we open those stations, right, we're getting 200 cars a day using them. And it's not one of them, right? We have 12 of these stations deployed throughout the state right now with 4 fueling positions. And we've opened them up, well, as you showed in your slide, Nico, one right after the other pretty quickly, and they get overwhelmed. So I think, you know, customers want to use these cars. And if we want to keep getting people into zero emission vehicles, which I think we do in the state of California, then we should keep opening up hydrogen stations and they keep getting used. The other kind of longer term perspective that I'll give is that, you know, if you look at it from more of a, I guess, sciencey perspective, just to displace all the gasoline vehicles that we have, and I think California wants to, you know, ban the sale of gasoline vehicles by 2035, or at least some people are talking about that. You're going to need, you know, battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, and maybe some other kind of zero emission vehicle, because we can't build, you know, batteries fast enough to do that. We can't build hydrogen production facilities fast enough to do that. It's going to be a really aggressive curve, and we're going to need every zero emission vehicle technology on the table, not to mention the customer behavior aspects that, you know, the others have alluded to. There are people that to get them into those zero emission vehicles, you're just going to need the longer range, larger vehicle, faster refueling time that hydrogen has. So that's my perspective on that.
Bill?
I think the question was around supply chain, really, right? And light duty, heavy duty infrastructure and vehicles, and how the markets support each other. Folks have already touched on it, but there is a lack of equipment suppliers today in this market because the market's not big enough. I think you're seeing more and more market entrants into this space, and you'll continue to see new and innovative products. You'll see better products that are more reliable, and that will, you know, not only feed the system, but will help bring down costs and bring innovation to stations and to vehicles alike, and allow for the continued growth of the market at lower expense to consumers. So excited to see that start to happen.
Gil, any additional comments?
I think everyone pretty much said everything that has to be said. I'll just reiterate something I said earlier, which is when you look at our heavy duty solution, the Exxon, it uses 2 Nexo fuel cell stacks. And so the stacks that we are developing are applied to both heavy duty and light duty. And so we're talking about economies of scale. So to help development costs improve for fuel cells, you need light duty. It becomes very critical. And so it's not really we can have one or the other. It's really, we need both, especially if we're moving towards zero emissions across all mobility fleets.
With that, and one underlying assumption I think all of you made when you were making your comments about investing in development, etc., is like you're all using largely, to my understanding, private capital for this. What's your perspective on the use on attracting more private capital to do what you need to do? Because obviously you need to generate revenue to have private capital and have investors as well. Is there any perspectives on that you want to share? Why do we need private capital?
Well, I don't think you can do it any other way, frankly. I mean, the state can only go so far, and we've seen this in other markets, you know, where you see the market with policy incentives and so forth to get things going, and eventually private capital takes over. And without the infusion of private capital, you don't have innovation coming to the marketplace to provide new and better products and drive prices down over time with head-to-head competition. This market certainly needs that. And we're starting to see that more and more as the market develops. As others have touched on, we don't have a capital problem. The problem, I think, is confidence, right? The market needs a confidence booster, needs to continue to have the kind of policy support that it has here in California and at the federal level. We need a runway for these programs that allow them to go for a certain amount of time where investors can garner returns on their money that they're putting out there. There will certainly be risks, but they are willing to take those risks if the signals they're getting from the policymakers are that, yeah, we're in and we're going to continue this at the pace that we've agreed to and accelerate. So.
And if I could just add on to what Bill just said, absolutely, we've seen the equation starting to shift between the percentage of public funding versus private funding coming into the new stations and the new infrastructure coming online. But there continues to be today a role for the state in terms of funding for these stations coming online. And, we are certainly grateful to our friends in the legislature and in the state agencies that continue to support the light duty infrastructure side. And, we absolutely discourage any efforts to prioritize heavy duty over light duty, batteries over hydrogen, hydrogen over battery, because I think we've all said it. We need all of these technologies together. And to Shane's point, we need everything we can get as soon as possible for the state to meet their goals. And so I think somebody said it, maybe it was you, Shane, our enemy is not, when we're sitting here on a hydrogen panel, our enemy is not battery electric. On the light duty panel, our enemy is not heavy duty, our enemy is carbon, right? And so all of the tools and technologies that we can bring together to reduce carbon is the goal.
Any additional thoughts on the private capital and maybe connecting it to the cost of fuel? And I think I already heard several of you mention that as well.
I'll say one more thing as well, Nico, which is that, sustainability is also about economic sustainability, right? I mean, you can't build infrastructure and, power vehicles at a loss, right? We can't rely on government subsidies forever without having a business case. We can't rely on the ratepayers to keep building charging infrastructure always, right? I mean, these business models have to stand on their own. So you need the private investment to come in, because ultimately that's what's going to sustain these solutions into the future, right? And I think that while it's really critical to have policy support and help from the government, that should be looked at as getting us over a bridge, right? And that private investment does have to play a bigger and bigger role over time, which it is. When we started building hydrogen stations in 2014, like Stani alluded to, the grant programs out there paid for about 70% of the CapEx on a project. That's totally flipped. Today, grant funding is paying for about 30% CapEx on a project, and it's private investment that pays for 70%. And that's not even counting the investments made in hydrogen production, like Air Liquide is doing, which is completely privately funded, the investments that we've made in our distribution hub, which was completely privately funded, the investments in our innovation center, completely privately funded, right? So there's a lot bigger share of private investment coming in already, and that's going to continue to happen. But again, consistent policy signals and the right help from government to help that transition happen, very, very critical.
Yeah, and I think one point to connect it to the events of tomorrow, there were some questions there as well about what's happening with regard to outreach to legislators and letting government entities know about what's going on here and what's needed. That's also what this Hydrogen Village event is about, to inform you that are in the audience, as well as some of you in the audience that are in government or are representing legislators. So tomorrow there's an event in person at the Capitol in Sacramento that showcases equipment from, I think, all of you on the panel here, or most of you on the panel here, that shows what you're doing, and so people can kick tires or look at equipment, hydrogen delivery equipment, or speak to representatives of all the organizations here on the call. So that message needs to be is being communicated, and we're working on that. So that's an answer to that question. One question I thought was interesting was also related to what's next. So there are questions about like, when do we see hydrogen stations on 99? When do we see hydrogen stations in, I'll call it the far north of California, meaning most likely, I think this is the area north to Sacramento, because often people don't talk and don't realize that north to Sacramento, there's another 5 or 6 hour drive to get to the border with Oregon. It's not close by, it's pretty far away. So any thoughts on that, on what's next with regard to infrastructure and vehicle rollout in those regions?
Except the OEMs go first on vehicle rollout, dealerships.
Well, like I said, where there is infrastructure, we certainly intend to offer vehicles. As I also mentioned, just because I've got responsibility for the Western United States for Toyota, we are working both in the states of Washington and Oregon to start some fueling infrastructure demonstration projects at this stage right now. But ultimately the goal is, the dream, the vision is to have, you're talking about California, frankly, all the way up to Canada, the hydrogen highway that one of our previous governors talked about several years ago, to have that become a reality for us and for our customers.
What I'll say is that, I think when you look at displacing, gasoline cars with zero emission cars, right, and usage, you go to the biggest vehicle population centers in the state first, right? And that's why you saw a lot of the concentration happen in the Bay Area and in LA and Orange County, because that's where most of the vehicles are. We as a company, I can tell you, we're branching out into kind of those, not as populated, but still important markets, right? So in San Diego, we now have a cluster of stations that we're developing. In the Inland Empire, we have a cluster of stations that we're developing. And we're also looking at places like Fresno, for example, right? Which again, secondary in vehicle population compared to the Bay Area or LA, Orange County, but still quite a big place. So I think we're going to kind of probably go at it like that, where we're picking off larger population centers, and then moving on to the next ones down there once we see some momentum build, right? So I think we'll see more hydrogen stations in San Diego, more in places like Fresno, Sacramento, etc., right? And then the other thing I'll say is that, FirstElement, one of the things that's next for us is we are moving into the heavy duty space, and we'll be opening up heavy duty stations over the next several years. And, those don't do as well to serve the light duty vehicle market because, they tend to be more on large freeways in truck stop areas, right? I mean, how many people in their gasoline cars stop at a truck stop and refuel their car there? Not that often, right? Maybe for that one time that you drive to Vegas, you might stop at a truck stop and refuel your car. And I think that's the capability that we hope to provide as we develop our truck station network. So at every one of our truck stations, we will also have a separate pump dedicated to light duty, because we feel like it's a wasted opportunity if you don't, right? We want to help enable those longer trips along some of those routes for light duty vehicle customers as well. So we'll take that opportunity every time we develop a truck station to add a light duty pump, right? So that'll hopefully, also take care of the longer trips that people want to do to get to places outside of their urban area where they're living and driving.
Thank you, Shane. Bill, you want to add to that as an infrastructure provider?
I think we're getting down to the end here. I would just like to say, stay tuned. Stay tuned. A lot of exciting things coming. So.
Indeed, and also the envisioned targets are also very significant. One of the questions was asking about what do I mean with 100 stations by 2030, but the California Fuel Cell Revolution document mentioned a number of 1 million vehicles in conjunction with that, and man, that would be a tenfold increase of the numbers that are currently in the works with regards to number of stations, and as well for the number of 100-fold increase of the number of fuel cell vehicles that's on the road. So there's quite a road ahead of us, assuming that we can continue to develop and work on the same curve that we're hoping to start with, even though we think the curve is relatively steep already, has to be even steeper. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make that happen. So with that, let us wrap up. We're a little bit over time. The folks that have asked questions that are not answered, we'll try to answer those directly in the Q&A at a later point. I suspect that we will post that together with the recordings. So with that, let me thank you all. Thanks to all the panelists, Stani, Bill, Gil, Shane, as well as Marc. Thank you for participating in this and sharing your perspective and pointing some of the things out. And I assume that all of you will either in person or some of your colleagues will be present at the Hydrogen Village event at the Capitol tomorrow. So looking forward to that as well. So if folks have not planned to be there but are in the region or planning to travel out here or can travel out here, be welcome. The event is open to all, and we look forward to learning together with you and making this happen. So thank you all. Have a great day, and looking forward to continuing to work with you.